Now that President Trump has been reelected as president, I just want to talk for a few minutes about what you can expect will happen with all those lawsuits and criminal cases against Donald Trump that have been pending and we've talked about over the last year or so. Because to make you the smartest person in the room, I want to make sure you know exactly what's about to happen and why it's going to happen so we can take your game in defending not just the Second Amendment, but the entire Constitution to the next level. Let's talk about it when we get back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and I'm proud to say the author of a new law review article. Very important. I'm going to start putting links to this down below. This is free. You can click on it and you can read it. It's in the Georgetown Journal of Law and Public Policy, the Georgetown Journal of Law and Public Policy associated with the Georgetown School of Law. It is about a 50 to 60 page paper discussing how you apply the Second Amendment jurisprudence in the context of all sorts of gun-related cases, a lot of the mistakes the lower court cases courts have been making. So check it out. If you want to get geeky and see how to argue some of these cases, how to think about some of these issues in dealing with, let's say, historical analog laws, check out the article in the Georgetown Journal of Law and Public Policy. I'll link down below. All right, folks, so here's the story. Donald Trump, we know, has been reelected as president of the United States. There are several pending criminal cases against him. I just want to briefly go through these so you hear directly from me as to what's going to happen here. So first case I want to talk about is, of course, the case in front of Judge Eileen Cannon. She's the federal district court judge down there in Florida. And this was the case that was brought by the special prosecutor, Jack Smith, who really had no authority to bring these cases on behalf of the Department of Justice because he was functioning as a senior official, a senior leader of the United States Department of Justice. And if you're functioning as a senior officer of the executive branch, you're supposed to be appointed by the President of the United States, and you're supposed to be confirmed by the United States Senate. Jack Smith was simply hired off the street by Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, to go after Donald Trump. That's what happened. Jack Smith brought an indictment down in Florida against Donald Trump, claiming that the former president, the former commander-in-chief, who's responsible for national security and top secret documents, and they had total authority to classify or declassify documents as he saw fit, as the commander-in-chief, under the Constitution itself. He was indicted by Jack Smith down there in Florida. You may recall this. Judge Cannon dismissed this case on the grounds that Jack Smith was acting ultra vires because he was not appointed by the president or confirmed by the U.S. Senate, and that all of his work in that document case dealing with confidential top secret documents allegedly was a no-go. Now, so this case is undeniably going to get dismissed against President Trump because he's going to take over the Department of Justice as the president, and his attorney general would undeniably fire Jack Smith if Jack Smith is still there and hasn't already quit. And of course, this case will be dismissed, which of course the case was already dismissed. It's up on appeal to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, so the case will simply be dropped by the Department of Justice under Donald Trump. Now, there are two additional defendants, I believe, in this case in front of Judge Cannon. What will happen to those two individuals as a practical matter? I suspect the cases against those two individuals will be dropped. They're really derivative of the President Trump case, and I don't see a Donald Trump Department of Justice going after these two individuals. And to the extent that was even theoretically possible, then Donald Trump would, of course, have the authority to pardon those two individuals, to take them off the hook from any criminal charges. But the reality was, we know all that confidential top secret argument document case down in Florida was a bunch of hooey. You've heard me say that repeatedly on Fox News, just a bunch of hooey and nonsense under the Constitution and beyond. And let's not forget the fact that Joe Biden had the same problem as the vice president and as a senator from keeping documents after he left office. He was never the commander-in-chief. He never had the authority to classify or declassify documents, unlike Donald Trump, because at the time, again, he wasn't the president. Biden was the vice president. Biden was a senator. And of course, he was not charged because Special Prosecutor Robert Hur, who was an officer because he was a U.S. attorney, Robert Hur, the U.S. attorney for the District of Maryland, basically said that Joe Biden was not mentally together to the point where he could not be indicted. You may recall that. And that gave rise to the two systems of justice argument, which I talked quite a bit about on Fox News. You probably saw me on there. So that Florida case will go away. Now, the next case to be aware of is the January 6th so-called cases. This is the case where they're trying to accuse Donald Trump and indicted him for somehow causing a bunch of fraud and creating a quote-unquote insurrection associated with January 6, 2021. This case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and the question was whether or not he was entitled to some level of immunity from his official acts. The U.S. Supreme Court obviously said yes, to the extent he was acting in his official capacity as president. He could not be indicted or charged or anything like that, because that would basically be a problem with the separation of powers, because you would have an Article 3 court under Article 3 of the Constitution sitting in judgment over the Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution, President of the United States. And the Supreme Court says you cannot have federal judges under Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution sitting in judgment of the existing President of the United States under the Article 2, because you have a violation of the separation of powers. We have three branches of government: the judicial branch, Article 3, the executive branch of the president, Article 2 of the Constitution, and of course the legislative branch, Article 1. And if you allow one branch to prosecute another branch, if you will, then you're going to cause a separation of power problem, and that's what the Supreme Court said. So the reality is this is another Jack Smith special. So for the same reasons I talked about the Florida case, Jack Smith was obviously acting ultra vires. That appears to be clear, but nevertheless, Donald Trump will either fire Jack Smith with the new attorney general, Jack Smith will quit, or the new attorney general will get rid of Jack Smith, and there's no doubt the new attorney general will simply not prosecute these cases. And again, even if there was some theoretical abstract concept where the Department of Justice would want to pursue a prosecution against Donald Trump, which is simply absurd, but let's assume that were to happen as a thought experiment, it's pretty clear that what would happen in this case is Donald Trump, of course, could pardon himself. That's a possibility. But the other possibility is the Supreme Court says you cannot criminally indict a sitting president. That's the Department of Justice policy. So even if you wanted to allow these indictments to continue to exist, the cases could not be actually prosecuted during the time period in which Donald Trump is the president of the United States. That would be viewed as distracting from his job as president, overseeing the country and protecting our borders, and that would not be allowed. But again, as a practical matter, the January 6 prosecutions against Donald Trump will go away, and I suspect a lot of the January 6 defendants are going to be pardoned, and I think that is correct in most instances. There's no doubt that is my view. A lot of those people never should have been pursued. It was another miscarriage of justice by milquetoast Merrick Garland, and I think a lot of nonsense occurred there. But again, this is not the purpose of this video. So again, Trump will get out of the Florida case. Trump will get out of the January 6 cases. Those will all go bye-bye, permanently, forever. See you. So that goes down to the next case, which is the state case in front of Juan Marchand. You may remember this case. This is really the bookkeeping case involving Stormy Daniels. This was another totally nonsensical case. I explained this on Fox News repeatedly as well. I'm sure you guys saw that as well. And of course, what happened there is it was a bunch of things that went wrong with the case, but here's what I think is about to happen. Judge Marchand was the judge overseeing this case. There was issues questioning about whether or not his daughter, who was a prominent Democratic consultant, I believe, or at least worked for Democrats in some capacity through a company that she was affiliated with. There was a question as to whether or not Judge Juan Marchand should recuse. He never did, but that question was an open item. But nevertheless, and here's how I think Juan Marchand, the judge, is going to get out and resolve this Trump case. You may recall that Juan Marchand actually tried the case of the judge, and the jury found Donald Trump to be guilty of 34 counts, so-called felonies. But, this felony charge was really just a made-up bookkeeping entry game. No one actually thought this was a real crime. It was a new construal of an old statute and arguably was misapplied. And then there's also questions as to whether or not Juan Marchand's jury instructions given to the jury passed the smell test under New York law. I don't think there's any way on earth that case could possibly be, withstand an appeal. Nevertheless, this is what I think is about to happen. And this gets into the practical reality of how I would handle this if I were Judge Juan Marchand, to kind of save face all the way around and to get this natty little problem off my plate. Specifically, what I would say is this, that I would say that this case was tried in the spring of 2024 in front of me, and Donald Trump was convicted on 34 counts. Then, a month or two later, the United States Supreme Court came out with their decision that said that Donald Trump had the benefit of presidential immunity, and that included information. This is the key. Judge Marchand, I think, will say that included information that was relating to Donald Trump's time as the president of the United States. And he's going to say that I allowed into evidence in my case, in my courtroom, in the Marchand case, And as a consequence of that, the evidence I let in related to Donald Trump's work in his capacity as the President of the United States. And because that information I allowed the jury to hear arose directly out of Donald Trump's activities as president, while president, in his capacity as president, that information was not legally allowed to come into evidence in the trial dealing with the Stormy Daniels bookkeeping question. And what Judge Marchand should do, if he's wily enough, is to say, so we need to dismiss this case and conclude that the jury verdict is null and void. And I'm going to take away the jury verdict because it was not fraudulent, but it was not done properly because some of the evidence that came into the trial and was considered by the jury should not have come in because it involved Donald Trump's presidency, and that is not allowed in because that information would be subject to presidential immunity. So Judge Marchand, I think, is going to say that the jury verdict has to go away and the case needs to be reheard and retried by a new jury with evidence associated with Donald Trump's presidential days being excluded from the evidence. And then Judge Marchand will say, unfortunately or fortunately, we're so late in the year and Donald Trump is going to be president in just another 30 to 60 days or whatever it is, and there's just not enough time to try this case again. I'm going to put this case on hold during the pendency and during the duration of Donald Trump's presidency, and the district attorney can revisit this case if they wish to in 4 years from now when Donald Trump is no longer in office. And that will effectively eliminate the case and moot it out, and it will save face of Judge Marchand by being able to say, I'm not going to sentence you, because that's the issue. Donald Trump has been convicted. His sentencing hearing is scheduled for the middle of November, and this is going to allow Judge Marchand the opportunity to basically skate and get rid of this case, not have to do the sentencing, and save face all the way around, and blame the U.S. Supreme Court for their ruling dealing with presidential immunity, which occurred after the Judge Marchand trial had occurred and the jury had returned the verdict. And that just gives rise, now that we've covered that case, that just gives rise, I want to mention, a civil lawsuit. This is the civil lawsuit that Letitia James, the same Attorney General of the of New York, Letitia James, the Attorney General of New York, that went after the NRA, also went after Donald Trump just because his name is Trump and tried to destroy the Trump business. This is that big, I don't know what the number is, I've lost track, $100 million, $200 million, whatever it was, some absurd damages figure that Letitia James, Attorney General's office in New York, got against the Trump organization, even though there was not a single crime victim, even though the banks that were allegedly defrauded in some way never complained and specifically testified on the stand that they weren't defrauded. They knew everything that was going on, and they were happy with Donald Trump as a client, and they'd like to have him as a client again. And this is where this case is going to almost certainly be dismissed, because if you paid attention to the oral argument in front of the appellate division, which is the appeals court directly above the trial judge in the New York State system, it was pretty clear that the appellate panel overseeing this Letitia James against Donald Trump case involving Donald Trump's business interest in New York was basically thinking that the theory of the Attorney General's office was absurd, borderline frivolous, and it's pretty clear that that verdict against Donald Trump's business, which is a civil case, not a criminal case, it's a civil case, but it looks pretty clearly that that verdict and the large damage award against Donald Trump's business interest is also going to go bye-bye, which of course as well it should, not only for the benefit of Donald Trump and Americans, but also for New York businesses, because New York is supposed to be a haven for business, a haven for finance, a haven for Wall Street. But if you start coming out with these anti-crazy business decisions, you're going to cause business people to skip over the state of New York and move their business to Tennessee, to Texas, to Florida, and other states that are not hostile to business. And other people have made this point, and I agree with it. So there you have it, folks. So the bottom line is the Florida case, the January 6th case, the Judge Marchand case in New York State involving Stormy Daniels bookkeeping, and of course the big civil verdict against Donald Trump's business interests involving Letitia James. All these things I think are going to be resolved in favor of Donald Trump. This all goes bye-bye, which is great news because it's going to allow Donald Trump to focus on protecting our country, sealing our borders, deporting people that shouldn't be here, that are here illegally and who should not otherwise be here, and protecting our right to keep and bear arms, which again, I think the influence of Elon Musk is going to really help us with the right to keep and bear arms. And as you know, J.D. Vance, the vice president, has plenty of photographs out there of him holding an AR-15. speaks well of how he views the right to keep and bear arms. So there you have it, folks. Hope you learned something here today. Make sure you follow me on X at 4Boxes Diner, and make sure you like this video, share it with your friends. I'm trying to grow the channel, so please subscribe, and we will see you again very soon here at the 4Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.